Hello and welcome to episode 279 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz, and here sometimes and also right now with
Ned Russell.
Hi.
Welcome, Ned.
We're broadcasting, well, not broadcasting, we're podcasting here from Ned's wonderfully air-conditioned DC house.
This is right, and we have a special guest of Heathrow. She's sleeping at our feet.
Heathrow's a dog,
yes,
by the way.
a dog, sorry.
That's important qualification.
It is important information if you're not familiar with Ned's dog. But yeah. I am on the road, passing through DC on my way to Virginia, and I thought, who better to spend 4 hours between things I need to do for work than with Ned on the day we record podcast.
And I helped Susan ride the metro from DCA for the first time ever, which she was quite impressed by.
That's true. When I go to DC, I almost always take the train if I can. Amtrak's not been doing so hot this summer because it's too hot for Amtrak. So for only the third time ever, the second time this summer, actually, I flew on the old shuttle route from LaGuardia to DCA. It was fine. LaGuardia was a bit of a mess. There was some sort of oil spill on the ramp, so our inbound aircraft was late, and then a flight to Miami was 2 hours late, because of course it was, so things were a little chaotic, but my upgrade cleared, which I didn't expect, because I don't even have status on American, and we pulled into the gate at DCA only 8 minutes late, which is practically early these days. And then I was on the train in less than 10 minutes. From off the plane onto the train in less than 10 minutes, I now understand why people like DCA so much.
DCA is a great airport. That's all I can say.
It's pretty nice.
There you go. And this is perfect to have you with Ned on this very episode of the podcast, because the universe was very kind to us today. We had important, huge news come out before we recorded, which is nearly unheard of.
Before I even woke up today, I opened my inbox and said, oh, wow, okay, that's not supposed to hit until 5 p.m.
So here's what we're starting with. Boeing has named Robert K. Kelly Ortberg, the former CEO of Rockwell Collins, as its new president and CEO. Ortberg will begin the job on the 8th of August. He was a program manager at Rockwell Collins in the late 80s, moved all the way up to the CEO job in 2013, and was mostly responsible for the company merging with United Technologies and RTX. And then he retired in 2021. He's currently 64, so he had to get a waiver from the Boeing board of directors for their mandatory retirement age. But it seems that they were placing a strong emphasis on someone with long-term leadership experience in the aviation and aerospace business. So that was a very short list. And Ortberg's contention for the post was first reported late last week by John Ostrower at the Air Current and picked up from there. And this morning, that seems to be confirmed. So, well, time to get to work.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not gonna be lacking for things to do the minute he starts. I was reading. He's got quite the laundry list, from rebuilding Boeing's reputation to integrating Spirit Air systems and getting 777X, 737 MAX 7 and 10 certified. There's a lot that he's going to be dealing with on day one.
On top of guiding the future of the company, like it can't just all be fix the problems of the past. This new CEO also needs to be something of a visionary to figure out what Boeing is going to do next, because the answer can't always be, we're too busy fixing the crap from the past. We can't think about the future. It is long past due for Boeing to think about the future. So I don't know all that much about Ortberg, but from what I've read up today, it seems like a good choice, a competent person to lead the company in the right direction. I'm very pleased that they did not pick some names that were thrown out in the not too distant past, even though there was a bit of defense that the current CEO of Spirit Aerosystems came from Boeing. And I just thought that was, despite his qualifications, and he was called the fix-it guy in the past or whatever, like it just felt too incestuous to me that you needed someone fresh to Boeing, a fresh pair of eyes, someone who's technical, familiar with the industry, but not so familiar that they'll get bogged down in the old ways of Boeing. So I think this is really a good choice. So good thing they got that waiver.
Yeah. I second you, Jason. I really am glad to see that Boeing picked someone outside the company. Again, I don't know much about Ortberg, but it seems, like you said, someone who knows the aerospace industry, but isn't bogged down in Boeing's past issues and everything.
Yeah, I didn't expect to just say like, yeah, this is a good choice. Let's move on. But here we are.
It does seem like a good choice. And I think, he's very familiar with Boeing because he was one of Boeing's largest suppliers for many years.
And that's important because it's going to give him unique experience in having dealt with Boeing from the outside, which by all accounts is an absolutely miserable, awful, unprofitable experience. And he might be the right person to right that ship. And maybe companies will actually want to do business with Boeing in the future.
And I think it's worth noting where he's going to be righting that ship from. As part of the announcement and as part of his kind of message to the company, he's going to be based in Seattle.
Wow. Like I don't want to clap because I'll peek the microphone here.
don't clap, but just pretend. Just pretend.
Clap here, a golf clap, a little golf clap. That is the exact right. And I'm glad they were able to find someone who would not be just okay working out of Virginia here down the road from Ned's house as much as he would enjoy that, or back in Chicago. Seattle is the exact right place. And I'm hoping he's going to drag a bunch of other executives out there with him.
Yeah.
I mean, it's entirely possible that they move the headquarters back.
Yeah. That's my question.
Do you think they're going to do that? Do you think they'll officially drag the headquarters that they just moved to Virginia all the way back to
Sure, Seattle? Why not?
Okay, do it.
I mean, why not?
Million economic incentives at Virginia, but considering Boeing's revenue line, I think they can afford that.
Yes.
So let's leave Ortberg to get started and say that we think that this is a good choice, and we'll see where that goes from here. Let's also touch on Boeing's second quarter earnings, which were reported today as well, which were roughly awful, I think is the financial term. Ned, you're much more of a financial journalist than Jason or I, but awful is generally how you would describe this. Am I wrong?
I mean, they're bad, yes, but I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I'm sorry, but 700 net, 383 million loss on billions of dollars in revenue, they're not terrible. They're not great, but they're not terrible.
They are making money. They're just also losing a lot of it. So, I mean, because we usually touch on the commercial stuff, we'll say as far as the Boeing commercial airplanes division, $715 million loss in the second quarter, which is almost twice what they lost in the same period last year.
Well, I'm going to say that's not going to turn around, Ian, until they're delivering planes as they promised to. So they've got to get their production in line before their commercial business turns back around. That's for sure.
Yeah. Their second quarter revenue dropped a third to $6 billion in the commercial division. And to Ned's point, the delivery rate is still well below where Boeing wants it and where Boeing needs it to be. Only 92 deliveries in the second quarter. That's a third lower than the 136 aircraft it delivered in the same period last year. The 737 program is still inching up to that rate of 38 per month. That's the, I guess, FAA mandated cap at this point, but they're still well below that. And the 787 program is trying to get back to 5 per month by the end of the year. And Jason, I know this has been your pet project, but it's not part of the commercial division. So we'll separate this out and discuss the new Air Force One contract for just a second.
It's not going well, is it?
It has never gone well.
It has never gone well.
It has never gone well.
Everyone knew this was a terrible deal for Boeing, a fantastic deal that Trump put together. And for some reason, Boeing leadership at the time went with, where they set a hard cap of, I think it was $4 billion, and said anything above that, Boeing's on the hook. And that on the hook now is $2 billion and counting. And those aircraft that were supposed to be ready for delivery by the end of this year are now pushed back to 2027 or 2028. So maybe not even for whomever is elected president in the next election cycle, maybe their replacement. I don't know. That's crazy. But whoever came up with the idea of taking two already built aircraft and retrofitting them to become the new Air Force One, thinking it would be cheaper and faster, they were wrong. They were very, very wrong.
Exactly. I would love to see the break-even point for what it would have been if they had just restarted the 747 line basically built two one-offs, just one after the other, done, and closed it back up again.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the issues seem to not even stem with the competency of building an aircraft. It's about Boeing not being able to retain and get employees clearance to work on the 747, that they just can't get the qualified people and then get those qualified people security clearances to work on that very, very special aircraft, which is apparently a lot harder in this post-COVID world than they anticipated.
Huh.
Yeah,
Well,
weird, right?
good luck to them, and yikes.
Mm-hmm.
Boeing also discussed the certification of the 737 MAX 7 and MAX 10, still citing for the first half of 2025 on both of those. They have a design in and ready for the anti-ice fix on the cowling of the LEAP 1B engines, and that is looking to get signed off and then installed on the aircraft, tested, and then hopefully eventually both of those aircraft will be certified. And then this wasn't part of the earnings, but worth noting again, in the past week or so, 737 MAX deliveries have restarted to China after having been stopped for a little while, after having restarted, after having been stopped for a very long time. So it's a stutter step to get 737 MAX aircraft delivered to China.
And on the other side of the coin, our friend Steph Miller has pointed out that there's a new airworthiness directive for 787s for all types of 787s, the 8, 9, and 10. It goes on to say, prompted by a report that during manufacture of drag brace lower lock link assemblies for the main landing gear, a certain required inspection was not performed. This is where it gets interesting. Investigation determined that the quality escape, there's that term again, quality escape, was caused by human error and has been isolated to a single technician. Undetected cracks could lead to fracture of the drag brace lower link assembly. This condition, if not addressed, could lead to main landing gear collapse, which is not something you want, but I find it very interesting that they've apparently isolated this issue down to one particular person not doing their job properly. And now Boeing's going to have to go back and, I guess, fix a lot of aircraft unless they want the main landing gear to collapse, which is not something you want.
No, not at all.
Let's get those inspected.
Yeah, very interesting. They pointed out that, like, Gary over there on the inspection line wasn't doing his job, so not great.
I guess good that they were able to figure out what happened.
Yeah.
Well, Boeing's problems seem on the mend, but that doesn't mean that the people in charge of oversight of both Boeing's activities and the FAA's are satisfied. Senator Maria Cantwell, who's the chair of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, sent a letter this week to FAA Administrator Michael Whitaker requesting that the FAA conduct a, quote, root cause analysis to see if any of its own oversight issues led to the issues that Boeing has experienced. Basically asking FAA, hey, maybe some of this is your fault, and what are the core problems that may have led to, well, all of this? So an interesting kind of continued push by Cantwell, who's been obviously at the forefront of dealing with the fallout from Boeing, as well as the FAA's lax oversight of Boeing. Cantwell, I think it should be noted, she's represents Washington, the state. So her district is in Washington State. And so, is close to Boeing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a legitimate issue for Cantwell to raise. The truth is we know that the FAA was lax when they certified the MAX, probably a little too close to Boeing, certified the MAX originally. And then, of course, we had the tragedies that occurred in 2018 and 2019. So I think it's well placed because we continue to see these quality issues, quality escape
Ned.
issues from Boeing on the MAX and the 787. So I'd say it never would hurt to do a root cause analysis of both the FAA and Boeing on this, just because it's certainly a concern.
Yeah, I'm surprised it took this long for someone to ask for something like this, saying, hey, maybe we let the inmates run the asylum a little too long. We need to figure out, what were the impacts of that and how long has this been going on and what may have the FAA missed because it was so cozy with Boeing. I'm actually really surprised this hasn't happened in the past. But this is good. This is long overdue. It'll be very interesting to see what this returns. Apparently, they want this done very quickly because the letter says, given the urgency of addressing these issues, please provide a response by August 12th. That's like less than 2 business weeks from now. So that's a pretty quick turnaround, but it's a good ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see how they respond. I think that'll be telling how the FAA responds. Let's completely shift gears and talk about the business of aviation. And we're going to start with the ultra low-cost carrier, which doesn't exist anymore?
Yeah.
At least in the US?
This is the new low-cost carrier segment of the podcast because we were talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 different low-cost airlines, all doing pretty radical things, all kind of somewhat expected, but I don't think what we're seeing was this expected. But I think maybe we should let's start with Spirit, perhaps. What do you think?
All right. I am ready to catch the Spirit.
With Spirit Airlines. Oh,
yes,
man,
absolutely. I still think they should bring that. They would have no financial problems if they brought that tagline back.
That's true. There was a totally different beast back then. No, wait, that's Frontier. Sorry.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
all right.
I mean, that's a good transition now that Spirit is doing the things that airlines love doing so well and following the leader. So a couple weeks ago, Frontier announced May. Yeah, okay. It wasn't even last month. It was a month before. Announced a big overhaul to its entire business model. In the newfound quest for all airlines to cater to the more premium segment of the industry, because apparently the low-cost carriers just cannot make money anymore. It's not a thing. So Spirit has gone upmarket a little bit. They've very suddenly they cut all of their ancillary fees, which they loved so much and passengers hated so much. So no more change fees, no more cancellation fees for most passengers. The first few rows of the aircraft will be Eurobiz style, where the middle seat is blocked. So that's an interesting change. And Spirit today, again, following Frontier, announced a major overhaul to its entire business model, much in the same vein of what Frontier is doing. So gone is just the buy the base fare at Spirit and then add on all of the different menu items like a bag and seat and food and drink and Wi-Fi and check-in and the big front seat. You could still do that, but now they also have 3, let's call them bundles above that. So the bottom is called Go. It gets you on the airplane and nothing more than that. Go Savvy gets you either, and this is interesting, a checked bag or a carry-on bag, but not both. I would always go with the carry-on bag because Spirit traditionally charged a lot more for carry-on bags.
You clearly don't have young children yet, do you?
I don't. I will cram everything into that check bag album, into the carry-on. I never check a bag, but it also includes a standard seat, which on Spirit could go anywhere from like $9 to, I don't know, $50 on board. And then above that, they have a tier called Go Comfy, which adds both the carry-on bag and the check bag and free small snack and drink and priority boarding, but also, interestingly, the same blocked middle seats premium seating section, which is really odd and interesting because they'll be keeping around the big front seats. Another golf clap for Spirit for not, there you go, thank you, Ned, for not removing the big front seat. That will be on a tier called Go Big, which basically comes with everything. So everything, a personal bag, carry-on item, check bag, big front seat, premium snacks and drinks included, priority boarding, priority check-in at select airports, and even free streaming Wi-Fi. So in this case, Spirit...
That's a domestic first-class product.
It is. It is basically...
That's straight up.
It ones up domestic first-class products with the Wi-Fi, because, I mean, except for Delta. Yeah.
It is now bringing to the table a premium product that is more premium, arguably, than most of JetBlue's fleet. JetBlue does not yet have a junior mint program like they may have next year. We'll cover that one day. But this now puts Spirit in direct competition, at least product-wise, in-flight product-wise, with the mainline carriers. Because if you're flying from New York to Chicago or New York to DC, you're not really getting anything in first class anyway. There's no meal on this flight. I was on an American E175. I got upgraded today, and it was just a regular snack basket with like Biscoff and some other random cookies and stuff. Like, it's fine, but Spirit can do that too. The only difference is the seat is, air quoting, pre-reclined.
Yeah.
But it's fine. I didn't recline my seat. Well, the seat reclined itself when we went to take off because it's old and it kind of reclined itself. Takeoff roll. It was very odd. But Southwest, coming out of the JetBlue failed merger, is doing what it thinks it needs to do to survive. And surviving right now requires a premium product. And that's what Spirit already has. They just needed to rearrange how they sell it. And I am really interested to see if passengers are willing to accept a premium experience on Spirit, because they did so much brand damage to themselves over the past decade that it might be unrecoverable at this point, but they're going to try.
Yeah. I have a lot of questions with Spirit's program. I spoke to a number of experts about this the other day. And the fare bundles, as Brett Snyder told me, it makes it easier for passengers to buy seats on Spirit. Yes, absolutely. But the question is how much, like Jason said, I mean, their brand is budget, super budget, everything extra. So how much are people going to be willing to buy up to these? And the truth is I see a lot of complexity being added to Spirit. So now looking at these things, so the flight attendant's going to have to know, I mean, the people sitting in the big front seat, that's easy enough to know they get their snacks and drinks, but go comfy people. Like, are you going to permanently block middle seats in a certain area? Or is
if you scroll down on the page you have loaded, you'll see that they have a mock-up of seats that have a different colored seat in the middle, like a gray seat instead of black. Man. So presumably, yeah, there are going to be at least some rows of the aircraft that are physically differentiated. This will be like the 15th time in the last couple of years that Spirit has done something different with its seats.
I mean, weren't we in Detroit looking at new seats eve of the pandemic in December 2019, Jason? Mm-hmm. I mean, I see this adding complexity to an airline that's already struggling with costs. Now, if they can get people to buy up and buy those extra products and pay more, then they can offset that added complexity and cost. But that's not the traditional Spirit customer. So I'm curious, question is will people buy into this?
I hope so. I am the non-traditional Spirit customer, as every single time I have flown Spirit, which is a good number, I have flown in the big front seat. But also, every one of those times has been either a day of upgrade or one of the plus grade options, because those seats tend to not get filled and they go for the lowest bid. I shouldn't be saying that on the podcast because then people will start doing it, but they'll take anything. If there is a seat open, they will take your $5 for that big front seat. So presumably, if they bring that offer up into the beginning of shopping rather than later on the seat map, they'll entice more people and maybe they'll fill those seats. But I don't think you're going to get the kind of upsell like Delta or American or United do, where they are charging hundreds of dollars typically added for first class, where Spirit, I'd imagine, will be lower. And maybe there are more people willing to buy up to that. Yeah. I'd imagine that's the thinking.
The other question I have is with the second from the top tier. What was it? The Go
Comfy?
Go Comfy. Are they going to be charging enough for that to offset the revenue loss from not filling those middle seats? So it seems very weird to me they're going to have two premium products, not one, but two on their planes, because they're going to have the big front seats that now go big, and they're going to have the Go Comfy. So whatever they're charging for Go Comfy needs to offset whatever they're losing from not selling however many middle seats that covers. So
I guess the benefit with Go Comfy is if they decide the middle seat's not working, they could just stop doing that.
This is true. That is the great thing. About retrofitting a plane, those seats can be sold at a moment's notice.
Sure, they'll be gray, but who cares? You'll have someone in them. You won't even.
Yeah, you won't see it. Doesn't matter. I mean, the marketing copy here is obviously go big or go home. And that's the upgrade marketing copy.
Go big Spirit,
and you're welcome.
Go home,
yeah,
Ian.
there you go.
And go home.
Well, it's good. They want you to buy up, Ian. They want passengers to spend more money on Spirit and buy up. That's what they want.
You know who else wants you to spend more money, Ian?
Well, everyone.
Everyone
wants me to spend more money.
I'm thinking an airline called Southwest, and people are pretty pissed off about this, I think. Most people are not, although their metrics will say that 83% of our passengers want assigned seats on Southwest. The general vibes on social media are Southwest is dead. Long live Southwest. This is not the Southwest we grew up with. Not me personally. I don't care about Southwest in New York. They're a non-figure for me. But Southwest is the next LCC that announced a major change to its business model, the biggest change in 50 years, probably because that activist investor came on board and scared the crap out of management there. And, notably, they're not wrong that they said, hey, if you know for a while now that all of your customers are demanding these changes to your product and you haven't done them, you're doing something wrong. It's really hard to fault that logic, honestly, when you think about it. But Southwest will start doing extra legroom seating. A third of the plane will be extra legroom, and they will also be doing assigned seating for the first time, I believe, in the airline's history. They will not be bringing club seating back. Sorry, Ian. I know you were. But it's a big change. We don't know exactly when this will happen or how it will work or any of the mechanics of it, but they've just announced that we're going to do this because at this point we don't have a choice.
No, they don't. Except, like you said, I spoke to a number of frequent Southwest travelers for a story I was working on the Washington Post, and everyone was unhappy with it. Now, there are people that probably don't care. Of course, there are people that don't care. We know people fly all the time. But I don't know. There's a lot of people that really like the open seating model, even if it wasn't my preferred way to go. And
probably because if you fly Southwest enough, you know all the secrets, you know all the tips and tricks to get you in the A or forbid the B section. It's past the infrequent passengers who are booking whatever's cheapest, fly once a year, who end up, is there a D section?
No,
or is it just C?
Yeah.
And those are the ones that this is going to benefit. But yeah, the loyalist Southwest passengers, they have nothing to gain from this. This is all a negative for them.
Except spend more in Southwest, because that's what Southwest wants them to do ultimately.
That's what Elliott Investment Group or whatever wants them to do. I don't think Southwest wants to do this, but it's a long time coming. And for people like me, this is a positive change. I might fly Southwest if they ever made a legitimate play in the New York market. But I don't like their current boarding thing. I don't know.
And one thing that strikes me with the changes is why they aren't adding bag fees. Now, I know they've had the whole
They haven't said they're not.
This is true.
They haven't said that.
It seems like low-hanging fruit. Every other U.S. airline charges bag fees, and with all the credit card deals and stuff out there, it's pretty common that you can get a free bag on whatever airline you fly regularly, whether you're a frequent flyer or not. So it seems like that would be low-hanging fruit. Have check bag fee, offer a free bag through the credit card, something like that. But yeah, you said, they haven't said they're not.
Once you do that, though, I think the brand is truly and well dead at that point. Bags fly free is their whole thing. Even if they were to move just to one bag free, that would probably also kill the brand for most people, because that's a big win for traveling public. Friends I know that bring their entire family down to Disney or whatever, they've got like you said, they have kids, they have bags.
I pay for bags now.
That adds a lot of cost. And suddenly Southwest is already not a great deal a lot of the time. That makes it a bad deal.
Well, that's the thing that I want to talk about here is that we're talking about Southwest in the context of a low-cost carrier. It hasn't been a low-cost carrier for quite some time. And it certainly hasn't been a low-fare carrier for quite some time either. My mother-in-law is the perfect example of a former Southwest loyalist. She has family in Florida, and between that and going on vacation would fly Southwest to Florida multiple times a year and never batted an eye at booking Southwest. Didn't even think that there were other airlines available. Just, I'm booking Southwest because I get my free check bags and things like that. And then a couple of years ago, I was like, well, why don't we, look at some other pricing? And United, with paying for bags, was still cheaper and had better timing. And that kind of blew her mind that wait a minute.
So she was like one of those people from really dating us now from the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where they're all walking out of the ship being like, where were we? What just happened?
Yeah.
How did we get here? Kind of like that. That's the traditional Southwest passenger that they've guarded so hard, but then they've also very recently made their flights and crucially pricing information available on Google Flights. And I hear that will be coming to more online travel agencies in the very near future. So now if you're shopping for a flight, you'll not just see that Southwest is an option, you'll see that it's more often than not a very good option price-wise.
It'll be interesting to see whether or not these changes can bring some of the people over who were, flying. Southwest says the research is clear that 80% of Southwest customers and 86% of potential customers prefer an assigned seat. So if that's the only difference, do people move back to Southwest? Maybe. I don't know. I would love to see what research they did. How was that research conducted?
There's something about research numbers like that in a company press release that I'm always you can ask a question a certain way to skew the answer to the way you want it. But yes, I'm very curious too, Ian.
Would you prefer to be chucked in the cargo hold by your belt, or would you like an assigned seat in the cabin?
Leading question.
Yeah. We should also note that Southwest is going to begin red-eye flights for the first
Oh,
time.
that's right. Landing on Valentine's Day.
Love is in the air, Jason. It's going to be in the air overnight.
I think not only are there red-eye flights, but of course they're transcon flights, which is also a thing that Southwest swore they did not do up until very recently. But I think some of them are like Denver. There are some transcons in there. I think
there's LAX Baltimore.
Yeah,
right?
that's as
there's one that's truly transcon. So there are 5 routes that begin on Valentine's Day of 2025, and then they'll expand from there. Las Vegas to Baltimore, Las Vegas to Orlando, LA to Baltimore, LA to Nashville, and then Phoenix to Baltimore. So one truly transcon, and then the others are also quite long.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of routes, there's another low-cost carrier that just really needs to reinvent itself. And it has now started doing that in the form of, what did JetBlue call it? Its overhaul thing?
Jet Forward.
Jet Forward. That's right. Not backwards, not up, not down, not side to side. Jet Forward. I hope there's some people out there who got that reference. But, I mean, the Democratic nominee for president gets that reference. So we'll see if anyone here does. But JetBlue is coming out of going back to the dead Spirit merger, doing anything it can do to stop the bleeding and make some money. And to do that, it is cutting the most routes I think any airline has cut at once since like the Great Recession.
Yeah,
I think you said that, right?
I did, yeah. It's the largest pullback of any airline since, network-wise, since the Great Recession. 15 cities have been cut already. 50-plus routes are gone. And they say more are coming, though they did say on their call yesterday that the biggest ones are out of the way. So it's not going to be as big as it's going. But yeah, JetBlue is shrinking to profitability almost, and adding new points like Manchester, New Hampshire, and their drive to be more useful in New England. I don't know.
That's something. But yeah, these aren't just like little tertiary cities that JetBlue is pulling out of. It's Charlotte, Minneapolis, San Antonio, Burbank, Tallahassee, which they just started earlier this year, Palm Springs. These are our major destinations.
So we previewed the cuts last week, and I don't think there were any huge additions to that list. But one of the things that we did find out in their earnings call was that they're also going to shrink the number, well, not shrink the number, but not have as many aircraft as they said they were going to join the fleet. And that one is very interesting.
That was a subtle way of telling me I don't remember what we talked about last week.
Correct. Yes.
That's correct. But yes, we did learn today that JetBlue is refocusing its fleet development pretty much solely on the A220 at this point. So it is deferring all future A321neo deliveries, including precious XLR deliveries to 2030 and beyond.
I'm sure Airbus is not upset about that because they can go.
United is pretty happy about this.
Yeah.
And this was an interesting question someone posed to me earlier this week. What is the mechanism for those slots? Does JetBlue get to basically sell them, or do they just return to Airbus? Do other airlines that were further back in the line accelerate, which I don't think is the case, but I think they really just they go back to Airbus, and Airbus is free to do what they want with them, I think, right?
I think that's how it works. Other airlines come up to Airbus, or Airbus is like, well, we know that you have been wanting to get planes earlier. And
I'm sure Airbus shops them around
in these. But I wanted to add to the deferrals. Ursula Hurley, the CFO of JetBlue, had made a very stinging comment about the Pratt engine issues when she talked about those A320neo deferrals. She said, at this stage, we just can't afford to take delivery of costly new aircraft that may need to be parked due to engine issues. And I mean, boom, that's why. They've got all these Neos already on the ground, 11 now, expect high teens next year. And they're like, we need to focus on what we're going to fly. And that said, the A220...
They're not immune from that.
No, the A220 is not. The A220 has an AD that caps the number of cycles that can be done on the engines. And I was talking to a bunch of people at IATA in June, and they're saying, yeah, we're flying the plane less purposely to save cycles. So it's not a good spot, but they're definitely leaning into that 220. And we should say that also will help them replace the E190 next year, which I think is a big part of their cost-saving program, to get that efficiency.
They said 60% of their E190s, which are primarily based out of Boston at this point, are already gone. So if you're a fan of the E190, it's going to be harder and harder to get on board one of those these days. I think your only option in North America is Aeromexico. I think still has them.
Yeah, Aeromexico still.
I don't even think Copa has them
Well,
anymore.
Breeze, but they're shifting the 190s over to charter.
Yeah, I
right?
think those are gone from commercial operations, or they will be soon. So yeah, get yourself down to Mexico City if you're an E190 fan. But that's about it.
All right. I didn't know we were doing the E190. I got kind of thrown off.
It's a wonderful airplane.
It is. So that kind of takes us out of the US. Unfortunately, we now head down under to Australia, where Rex has called it quits on jet flying. This was the Australian regional carrier that decided it was going to become a low-cost 737 operator and challenge the Qantas Virgin Australia duopoly, and lost.
Love to see just how much they lost by. I'd love to see those numbers.
I think you would be crying if you saw those numbers, Ned.
Probably would.
They have entered fiscal administration. The 737-800 fleet is done flying, but especially worth noting that the regional turboprop flying with their SAP 340s remains completely unaffected. So that's a separate side of the business, and that continues apace.
They serve a lot of cities in rural Australia that don't have air service otherwise. So that's important that the turboprops are still flying.
Oh, absolutely. That would be one of those things where this is unfortunate, absolutely. But losing kind of the EAS, basically, of Australia would be far worse, I think, in the long run.
So my question with Australia is we keep seeing these airlines trying to get into sort of the core network carrier market. We saw Rex in 2021 with the Jets. Bonza didn't really do like the Sydney Melbournes, but did a lot of the points, and they've both failed this year. And what I keep coming back to is Australia always seemed like a two-airline market. It was Ansett and Qantas in the 90s, and then it's been Virgin and Qantas ever since Ansett's collapse. And we've seen airlines try. Look, Tiger Air came in, a decade ago before it got bought by Virgin. It continually proves to be a two-airline market, but people keep trying to butt in. I just don't see how the market evolves to a three-airline market, lumping Jetstar in with Qantas, just to be clear.
I mean, I think it's worth noting that generally people who start airlines seem to be a little
optimistic.
Yeah. Sure, that's an extremely nice way.
Everything Ned just said is exactly the same that could be said for Canada as well.
Yes.
Very geographically similar. I mean, they couldn't be any more dissimilar, but geographically, you have huge countries, but with small populations very far geographically apart from each other, and they just cannot seem to sustain more than two airlines. I mean, Canada can barely sustain two airlines, let alone having any of the LCCs or the ULCCs on top of that. But
add to that population concentrated in like 4 or 5 large markets.
Right.
So they fly all the same routes in the same cities.
Yeah, it seems like the unfortunate truth is that both of these countries will just be duopolies until something truly disruptive that isn't, we're going to operate 737s for a massive loss and hope it gets better eventually, because that's proven time after time it does not work. Something dramatically different has to come and change that landscape. And in the same region as Australia, we'll move over to Air New Zealand, who says, yeah, all of that stuff we were planning for 2030 for climate targets, yeah, it's not going to happen. So this week, Air New Zealand said it has axed its interim climate targets, stating that measures needed to meet the target were unaffordable and not readily available. And this comes to us from, yet again, Flight Global, because I couldn't actually find any press release issued by Air New Zealand on this topic. But the article literally says, and I quote, in a surprise move announced July 30th. Yeah, it's a surprise because I can't even find anything on this. But what I said on Twitter earlier this week, I think is something I want to focus on, that I think Air New Zealand is the first airline to readily admit all of these climate goals that all of these airlines around the world have put in place is completely unachievable. It cannot be achieved with the progression of technology, the delays to existing technology, and the financial situation at these airlines. These features combined is just all these climate goals. We're getting closer and closer. And if anything, progress is inching the other way, as both Airbus and Boeing and Pratt & Whitney can't deliver anything meaningful at this point in terms of offsetting climate emissions, to the point where Air New Zealand just said, you know what, screw it. We need an entirely new plan because what we're working on isn't going to cut it.
Yeah. And I think about like the sustainable aviation fuel side of that. And, as much as industry is banking on SAF to significantly cut emissions, there are still huge hurdles to getting SAF anywhere near commercial production levels. And like you said, I think we're going to see this from more airlines, just because even with bills that have passed in the US and Europe, these facilities have to be built, and these don't get built in a year or two. We're easily going to see delays. So it's, like you said, Jason, I mean, kudos to Air New Zealand for acknowledging that. But it couldn't have been easy.
No, and part of that is Air New Zealand has a lot of Dash 8-300s zipping around the country, and they had planned some zero emission, very quiet, probably battery powered, hydrogen powered, something aircraft to replace those, but they haven't even gotten to the point where they can do any sort of trials. They wanted to do that in 2026. That sounds wildly optimistic at this point. So that's a future that just doesn't seem to be happening, but it's good to see an airline come to the realization and publicly say, like, this isn't going to work. Something needs to change.
To Ned's point, this is not something, and we've talked about this, I don't know how many times, but we've talked about it before, where this is not something the industry can do by itself. This is not a problem that is going to be solved by the airlines. This is a problem that is going to be solved by the airlines and suppliers and the government getting involved, saying, this is our energy policy. These are the things that we are going to work on. And these are the things that we're going to support. And these are the things that we're not going to support. And until that happens, I think we're just going to be doing this cycle of, these are all the things we want to do. And then we delay them. And then, eventually say, okay, well, we're past the point where we can do these things. We need a new plan. And just we're going to do that over and over again.
Ironically, it seems like the only thing that's truly moving forward, that's truly going to possibly happen in the near future, are eVTOL flights. And that goes in the opposite direction of adding flights. And I would argue adding emissions, because these aren't just planned to replace helicopters. It's planned to dramatically increase the number of point-to-point connections with these aircraft. And there are impacts on that as well. And it seems like that's the only technology that's actually progressing, is adding more flights to the system. At least they're electric or whatever powered, but it's not the solution the industry needs.
Yeah, I mean, as you look at growth, even if you're doing it with electric, there's not direct emissions, but what about, the indirect emissions, the things like getting the batteries and all of the parts. So yeah, there's a lot of issues there.
Good insight, Ned.
Good insight, yeah.
Speaking of issues, TUI Belgium's E2 fleet is grounded, and it's a Pratt & Whitney issue, but Jason tells me it's not the Pratt & Whitney issue that we've all come to love.
That's true. It's the typical story of a new tech aircraft grounded because of Pratt & Whitney issues, but this time it's different, but it's really the same. So TUI Belgium were using the E195-E2 to exclusively operate flights out of Antwerp Airport, which now has no TUI Belgium flights out of Antwerp because these are the only aircraft they had for it. Aviation Week reports that over recent months, GTFs, blah, 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 have failed inspections. We know that. But TUI's E2 appeared to be affected by a different issue, and that's where my ears perked up. Industry sources familiar with the situations told Aviation Week that all three of the E2s have been impacted by oil consumption issues. This grounded TUI's first E2 in March, and the second and third aircraft were grounded in quick succession during the week commencing July 22nd. Of course, there's the usual quote of saying Pratt & Whitney is working closely with the airline to return the aircraft to service as quickly as possible, blah, 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 blah. But we've heard rumblings of other Pratt & Whitney aircraft having some sort of oily, weird smell on board. And apparently that's what was happening with these aircraft. And it's a totally different issue. So yay, more Pratt & Whitney GTF issues. This time, again, taking out an entire segment of an airline.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, boy's right.
Let's round up with some things that happened last week that are worth mentioning. A few Farnborough Airshow orders that happened after we recorded. Actually, a pretty sizable one.
Chunk.
So we'll start with a small one, which is 5 A350-900s for Abra. And those could end up at Wamos. We'll see.
The Airbus announcement specifically went out of its way to say Abra is the majority shareholder of Avianca and GOL, I believe.
Yes.
But speculation is that this company is also apparently taking over Wamos Air, which can't operate old 747s and 330s forever. So maybe these aircraft go there. But I am in the camp of it would be much more exciting if GOL started long-haul flights with A350s, or if Avianca defected from being a Boeing 787 operator to the A350, but those seem unlikely, but exciting.
Unlikely but exciting is
Ned's
really the underlying.
I like unlikely but exciting. Yes, that's a good way to put it.
It's the underlying, where we go for with this podcast. And then there's the big order from Flynas, which is the Saudi Arabian low-cost carrier, 75. Jason has a typo in the show notes, but it actually works out because they will be flying a lot to Neom. So 75 A320neos, and then 15 A3390-900.
Well, come on, my laptop traveling. There's going to be some typos.
Fair enough. So 75 A320neos and 15 A330.
The one number that here that is not a typo is the end where it says those 15 A330-900 will have up to, I think, more than 400 people on board in their two-class configuration, which is up there. That's not the most. I think there are some out there with upwards of 440, which is max PAX config, but 400 people, that's going to be a pretty cramped ride, but that's kind of the whole point with low-cost long haul, especially to a place like Saudi Arabia. Like, these are going to be going out to India and to the Southeast Asia to pretty much bring employees back and forth from those regions. And they don't care about comfort for the most part. They care about getting there and getting there cheap. But that's a lot of passengers on the A3390-900.
Yeah. We're breaking Airbus launching a new aircraft. This is breaking news on the podcast. Yes, and it's the only place you'll hear it. Jason, I like how you noted this one in the show notes. The Olympics air hole.
Uh-huh.
I think we briefly touched on this last week.
I'm not sure. I don't think we did.
Or maybe we didn't. But as part of Paris's plane-free plan for the opening ceremony, there was an 80 nautical mile circle around the city in place for much of Friday afternoon and evening, which spread air traffic around that, in Jason's word, air hole, and halted flights to Paris airports for the time being. So we put together a fun little time lapse, and that, it's linked in the show notes, and it's on every social media platform you could possibly imagine. But 2,000 and change was the number of flights affected by this particular temporary flight restriction, though we did get to see some good air-to-air refueling patterns from the French Air Force A330 MRTTs. So that was fun.
And I bring this up because I want to ask listeners if anyone can recall a bigger, more impactful peacetime, non-war zone, no-fly zone like this before. Obviously, after 9/11, there were no flights at all over North America, but when is the last time there's been such a large no-fly zone over a city or a country that's not in some sort of active war or a conflict of some sort? Like, this wasn't like in the past where we had inaugurations here in DC where there's a huge no-fly zone. That's for GA aircraft. DCA and IAD, they weren't impacted. Commercial flights continued. This would shut down Paris's airports, and I presume other commercial airports outside of Paris as well. Anything within, would you say, 80 nautical miles? That's a huge.
Yeah, so there were a few. I mean, the main airports affected were Charles de Gaulle and Orly, but there were other airports that were affected outside of that.
Wherever Ryanair flies to. Paris.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, Paris is the weird one because they go right downtown. But the crazy thing to me is that this affected overflights as well.
Right.
This wasn't just Paris and then up to,
that's why I called it an air
20,000.
This wasn't like just shutting down an airport or the airspace around.
This was everything.
There was a hole in the map where there were no airplanes. Except for the two airplanes, making sure that there were no other airplanes there.
Well, yes, and the airplanes that were being refueled by the airplanes that you could see. But the interesting thing here is that as far as events go, I think this is people were talking about, well, there's security and everything like that. And I goes, this I think goes beyond security. This was, we don't want to hear anything that sounds like an airplane during our massive open air ceremony.
And it rained on their parade anyway.
And it rained anyway. Because Ned is on the program this week, we're going to close with news that is, I guess, extremely relevant to Ned. The E-175 has been approved for Aspen. Tell me, what does that mean?
Aspen has been restricted to only the CRJ-700 for years. It has a short runway, steep approach, but there has been a push to get the 175 certified there simply because the 700 is not going to be around for much longer. There was a period that Delta didn't have any 700s during the pandemic, and they had to stop service to Aspen. Aspen being a very posh and lucrative ski destination. So this is a big deal that they've approved it, but it's interesting, and Jason noted this to me earlier, the community actually has not been entirely on board with the idea as much as the air service development people and the airlines are getting the 175 in there, simply because the community is, they want to be able to get there, but they don't want anyone else to. They're that kind of community. So
of course.
It's exciting to see. I mean, I think this means we could see more air service to Aspen in the future. I don't think the airport's slot controlled, though I know the terminal's pretty tight. But it definitely allows flexibility, and so with CRJ 700 fleets dwindling and every airlines moving to 175s. So it's good.
It was really weird seeing local news reporting on this, saying like, yeah, the FAA had to like demand that the airport authority stop blocking the E-175 from being authorized for Aspen. I'm like, that's completely contrary to everything that should be happening. Like usually airport authorities fight tooth and nail and would kill to have airlines wanting to operate bigger aircraft to their cities. But then there's Aspen who said, no, we don't want that. Which, okay.
Fair enough. I said we were going to close with that, but we're not, because I just remembered, because we're talking about E-jets, LOT is taking delivery of its first E195 E2. And that's good for all sorts of reasons, but there's a little bit of history here, is because LOT operated the first ever commercial flight of an Embraer E-jet 20 years ago, back in 2004. Step for an airline that has some important history with Embraer's E-jets. So I'm just going to round that out there.
It was only 2004 for the first E-jet flight of any sort, huh?
Yeah. The E170 first commercial flight was in 2004. First deliveries and first commercial flight.
Interesting, because I know that JetBlue was the launch operator for the E190, and I feel like it wasn't too long after 2004. I didn't think that was maybe just the following year in 2005. So I didn't know there was so little time between the little one and the big one at Embraer.
Back when aircraft could be developed and certified in just a few years.
Weird.
Well, Ned Russell, thank you so much for joining us today and allowing us to use your house as half of the recording studio. Always a pleasure to have you on the show, and hope we did not wake Heathrow.
She's sleeping soundly, Ian, sleeping soundly.
Excellent. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.